Let's get started. Hello, welcome to the Stormwater Utility Forum. My name is Mike Shapiro. I'm the co-chair of the Jersey Waterworks Stormwater Utility Subcommittee. We are very excited to have you with us today for this first session. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the host organization, Jersey Waterworks. Jersey Waterworks is a collaborative effort of many diverse organizations and individuals with the goal of transforming water infrastructure through effective, financially sustainable water systems, empowering stakeholders, successful and beneficial green infrastructure, and smart combined sewer overflow control plans. The goal of the Stormwater Utility Subcommittee is to provide educational resources regarding sustainable, dedicated, and equitable funding opportunities. Jersey Waterworks consists of many different committees run by volunteers, including this one, the Stormwater Utilities Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Asset Management and Finance Committee. Our subcommittee felt it was our duty to provide education to you folks on stormwater utilities. We created this forum so that we can bring stormwater utility experts to you and to serve as a resource in the community. So we put this together, full series to introduce you to the concept. Next slide, please. For each session, we'll be hearing from our experts. We'll give about 15-20 minute presentation, followed by an active Q&A discussion. Sorry. We hope that you will be able to join us for all 5 sessions and that you will walk away from these sessions with a deeper understanding of what a utility is, or a stormwater utility is, how it works, and how your community might benefit from one. But before we get started, we have a couple ground rules and some logistics to review. This session is being recorded, but only the presentation will be recorded. The Q&A following will not be recorded. In case anyone were to feel uncomfortable freely asking questions and discussing topics. We also ask that you respect others and keep the conversations in the discussion portion confidential to these sessions. Also, please keep it specific to this session. We know you have a lot of questions on stormwater utilities. There are 5 different sessions. So please keep your questions specific to the topic covered today. Also, please feel free to post your questions in the chat as they pop up. However, please understand that we will not be answering the questions until the presentation has been finished. Now I'd like to introduce our 3 experts presenting today. We have Lindsay Sigmund of New Jersey Future, Elizabeth Treadway of WSP and a key organizer of this forum, as well as David Mason of CDM Smith. And just a few other people that are potentially present today and were instrumental in planning this series and or will be presenting at future sessions. We have Patricia Dunkirk of New Jersey Future. She is our subcommittee backbone liaison staff. We have Prabha Kupa of Black and Beach, another key organizer of this forum. And we have Dana Patterson of Princeton Hydro, who is my co-chair with the subcommittee. Next slide, please. Back one. And here you can see all 5 of our sessions today: utility concept, New Jersey legislation, utility development process. Next will be the stormwater financial planning and funding options, stormwater rate structures and credits, stormwater utility policies, and in November, our final stakeholder engagement session. With that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
All right, thanks. Well, as I said, today we're going to talk a little bit about the utility. This is Dave Mason with CDM Smith. Going to talk a little bit about the utility concept, kind of really high level. And one of the things we first wanted to talk about is when people say the word stormwater utility, there's still lots of thoughts about what that really is. And to a lot of people, when you say stormwater utility, it's really just the funding aspect of the program. And that's all they think about. But we really like to look at when we talk about stormwater utilities, a more holistic approach to managing your stormwater. So it's not only the funding aspect, but it's the organizational aspect of your program. and what how it benefits the end user, since it is a user fee. So really think when we talk about stormwater utility is the organizational aspect of your program beyond just the funding piece. And Elizabeth is going to talk a little bit more about that at a later point in this presentation. Next slide. And so, continuing on to that, the reason why people may implement a stormwater utility fee is to really establish a stable and predictable funding mechanism for the organization to get away from the annual battle with police, fire, and other types of things that people look at a more high profile, to be able to manage their program in the long term. And so that enables them to tackle the kind of chronic problems they may have, whether it's flooding or water quality, since they have a stable funding source to rely upon to get those projects done. And then, in the larger sense, those larger construction projects that typically there's not funding available year-to-year basis to do those large projects from a stormwater aspect when you're fighting for a tax revenue. Once you get that stable funding program in place, you can start to plan ahead for those things, do some master planning to decide what you need to do. So it's, again, that more holistic approach to managing the stormwater system. But just referencing stormwater utilities, while this is a new concept in New Jersey, it is definitely not new across the country. Stormwater utility programs have been around since the early 70s, and they're now estimated to be over 2,000 stormwater utility funding programs throughout the country. So not a new concept. And all the things you're going to hear from us today and through these next workshops are proven strategies to implement these types of programs. Next slide. So one of the things we always like to hit is how is your stormwater utility fee different from how you're funding your program today? And so presumably most of your program today are funded through tax revenues that come through the general fund. Those taxes are based on the valuation of your property. They can be used for a lot of different things, not just stormwater. So you're competing for those dollars every year. And again, they go into the general fund and have to be allocated each and every year to your program. So you're not able to rely upon what you're going to have from a year-to-year basis. The stormwater utility fee is a true user fee, just like water, wastewater, electric, trash, what have you. It's a fee for the service provided to the customer. And that fee must be proportional to that service provided. And those revenues that are collected are dedicated to the stormwater program. They can't be spent on other things. So that gets to that sustainable funding program that you can use to expand what you're doing from the stormwater side. So want to get away from the terminology of rain tax, storm tax, those kinds of things. It is a true user fee. Next slide. And as being a user fee, the benefit must equal the charge. And so these are kind of the three or four bullets related to that. The concept is that the management of the runoff contributed by properties is where there's a benefit. So if we had a natural area where water is not going to generally run off, we wouldn't need a utility program. But since we enjoy our development, our homes, our driveways, our parking lots, our businesses, they generate additional runoff that needs to be managed. So the benefit that we're receiving from a stormwater program relates to that property's contribution to the problem of stormwater runoff. And so the fee relates to the runoff contributed by that property. And while there's lots of things that factor into runoff from a property, the common proxy that we can measure and that's been defended in courts throughout the country is impervious area. So most stormwater utilities these days are based upon the amount of impervious area on your property, since that's the most accurate way that we can assess the amount of runoff that generated from a property. So next slide. And just from a really high level, we're going to get down in the weeds on this in a future presentation, but most utilities these days are set up with some kind of base fee for residential properties, or sometimes specifically single family properties, and then the non-residential properties are going to pay in some proportion to that. And so you're going to hear the term throughout these presentations, ERU, or equivalent residential unit. That's typically what the term that's used to talk about the base fee. So most of these are charged from a monthly or annual basis, but it may be $4 or $5 a month for the typical residential home. That's kind of the average throughout the country for these types of programs. And so There's a lot of statistical sampling that goes on to tells you what that typical residential home is in your community, and that becomes the basis for charging others. So this just basic example, if a typical residential home in this community had an average impervious area of 3,000 square feet, so again, the rooftop, the driveway, the patio, what have you, that's your base. And then when we go and we measure the amount of impervious area on a non-residential property, and that's the example on the right where we measure the parking lot and the rooftop, and we cut out the island, so we're only looking at the pavement and the things that we're creating runoff. So that one has 30,000 square feet of impervious area. It's 10 times bigger than the residential home, so it pays 10 times the fee, and that's how we get to the proportional share of the contribution. So that's just a really high level look at how the predominant amount of stormwater utilities are set up. And we'll certainly get into the weeds on future meetings about how they can differ and what other options there are. But with that, we're going to turn it over to the next presenter.
Thanks, Dave. So as Dave mentioned earlier, stormwater utilities are not a new concept. This map is showing the number of utilities by state as of last year. The source for this map and a lot of other great resources, the Western Kentucky University Stormwater Utility Survey that they do every year, just gives a snapshot of what's going on across the country regarding stormwater utilities. So as you can see, there are other states that have stormwater utilities: Texas, Florida, California. They range across the country. But as you'll see on the map, New Jersey, there are currently no operating stormwater utilities. Next slide, please. But to be fair, this wasn't made possible in New Jersey until 2019, when the state legislature passed the Clean Stormwater and Flood Reduction Act. So this law allows, but does not require, local governments to establish stormwater utilities. So it's not a mandate, it was the enabling legislation allowing local governments to explore this option for funding stormwater programs. So in the law states that stormwater utilities must collect fees based on the amount of stormwater a property generates. That's what Dave was just covering. So there needs to be this nexus between how much stormwater a property generates and the fee that applies to that given property. A utility can be established by municipalities, counties, groups of municipalities, so could take a regional approach, and sewerage and improvement authorities. And in the law, it states that funds generated are dedicated solely to stormwater management. So the fees cannot be diverted to other municipal uses. The law does include, what the utility can pay for. I'll list a couple, but the law does outline, the legislation does outline all the different uses for the fees once they're collected, but can pay for the establishment of the utility, capital expenditures, operations and maintenance of stormwater infrastructure, asset management, public outreach and education, could help with permit compliance. So there needs to be something that ties back to stormwater management. And I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you. So when we talk about the development process itself, I'm going to reiterate a very important principle that Dave started with, and that's this is more than creating cash. This is about establishing that foundation of services that the community needs and values. That's the principle that you really want to keep in the forefront as you go forward. So in the next slide, we're going to just highlight some of those things that are maybe obvious to you, maybe not, but not always to the public. You have real issues that need to be solved. The utility is that practical vehicle that allows you to look at your organization, to be able to look at the methodologies that you currently use in order to raise revenues, and be able to then establish what is that service fee structure that can generate sufficient enough revenue to deliver the services that are necessary. So the role that's changing in your community, as you see the state, for example, increasing the complexity of your water quality permits, there is a need. And the most important piece of this process is to understand, as I state in the next slide, that the principle you want to deal with here is equity and fairness. That's the underlying motivator. Why do utilities exist across the country? It really is to look at the way in which the service needs to be delivered and a fair and equitable method that allows us to distribute those costs across all of the properties. So the next slide really sets forth what it, if you look at this and think, oh my gosh, look at the complexity of that workflow. It is complex. That really lays out and captures all the steps through implementation. The boxes that are highlighted in the black bar, it really is the feasibility study. And it's important that you start with that. If you jump into, we've made the decision and we're just going to go ahead, you really miss the opportunity to build that program case, to assess all of your financial structure and needs, the data, as we've emphasized a couple of times. How are you going to allocate these costs? The law requires you to tie this to a generation of revenue factor. You need to appreciate then how your governance policy is going to work. If you want to do this regionally, that track alone can be extremely complex and time consuming. So you answer those key, those key questions. What is stormwater? What are your programs? Who's currently paying for them? How are they? And most importantly, to answer the question, do you have the tools to move forward? So let's look at then the purpose of the feasibility study. One of the most important things that having those 2,000-3,000 communities go ahead of you is that it really has established the legal foundation for using user fees to fund stormwater. Water, sewer, solid waste, long established that legal foundation. Stormwater is indeed, even though we've been practicing for 50 years across the country, it is important to recognize that there are those foundational legal steps. And that's what your feasibility study is going to establish. It'll answer who's going to govern, how the program works. It's going to provide you the outsourced or the outreach to your public. It'll establish all your financial policies. It will look at the data you have to support it. So let's take a look at the next slide. How do you get started? One of the easiest ways is to start internally with a committee that's going to represent finance, public education, public works, your administration, however your data can be managed. If you can create that, you can build that compelling case for change. It's establishing that vision, knowing what your current level of service is, and excuse the acronym, LOS stands for level of service. Establish what your future needs to be and understand the cost. When you focus on those things, the legal process will fall out in the end using the methodology necessary depending on your organizational structure. So what are we delivering in the end? A program that you've built, your ability to distribute costs. You've definitely determined whether you can do it on the basis of the statute. You've identified things that are barriers. So why not just go straight to implementation? Because there may be things within your internal structure that you're going to have to overcome. How are you going to deliver the bill? Do you have a method in place today? Is there a need to change that method? Say you want to put it on an existing utility bill. Do you run the utility? Is it set up structurally to take a land-based charge, again, linked to impervious area, into a meter-based system for water or sewer and even solid waste? So it's important to work through all of those things, identify those issues, and be able to report to your public whether it is feasible for you to proceed or not. So we've covered a lot, hitting the highlights. What we want to do now is have a conversation with you. we want to hear what questions are on your mind. You have a team of very skilled individuals here that will